So here's our brooch frame, and it's just a little brooch frame. This is a large circle one, so it comes in 3 parts. You've got 1, 2, 3 parts. And I've just done a little circle on here. This is supposed to depict our embroidery. Obviously for you it could be a rabbit, or it could be anything else if you decide to put something else into your brooch frame. So we're going to put this into our brooch frame here. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to fray check the area we're actually going to cut out. So I'm going to place that on, and you need to make sure that it's central. So if you wanted to, you could do some little lines on your material with a pen, and then you can take it off and see whether that's central. So I can see that actually it needs to be slightly further over. Now just be aware that if you do draw on your material and it's not quite central, and then you move it over, then the line that you've drawn on could be on this area here, which is the area that's going to show when you put it in your brooch frame. This little edge here, this rim, is only a very thin rim, so it will only take up a very, very minor edge of this disc here. So I'm just going to move that over slightly, and then I'm going to fray check the edges. So I'm going to take the fray check here. This is the one that I use, okay, and this just means that the edges won't fray, hence the name. So I'm just going to put a line, a fray check just around here, all the way around, and it's a reasonably thick line, and especially with silk, silk's very prone to fraying, so this is really good to actually use if you're cutting anything out. And it might be a little slip, it could be anything that you want to apply onto another design. In this case, obviously, we're using it for our brooch frame to make sure that it doesn't fray. So that's nearly finished. Now you do have to wait for that to dry. Okay, so we're going to wait for that to dry, and then I'm going to show you the next step. So once the other side is dry, we're going to place our little disc again in the centre on the back, and we're going to just do a little bit of fray check all the way around the very edge of our disc. Okay, like that. And that'll soak in just a little bit that way. And the reason you want to do that is because you want to actually cut that area out flush with our disc, and then when you're folding the material over, it doesn't it's not as thick, so you've only got one edge of material to fold around instead of 2. And if you've done it on something like felt, which can be very good because it can provide a bit of depth to this side, you wouldn't want the felt coming round the edge because it would be too thick. So I'm just going to leave that now to dry again, and when both sides are dry all the way through, then I can show you the next stage. Okay, so it's all dry now. Now sometimes it does make a slight mark, so just be aware of that. You don't want too much of a mark on the area here. If it did show significantly, then obviously that could potentially ruin your design. So you've just got to be aware of where you're putting that fray check. So we're going to turn it over onto this side, and we're going to place our disc just there, and we're going to draw around. I'm just using a biro. You can use gel pens or a Sakura pen. It is very useful. So just created a little shape there, which is around our area, and I'm now going to take my scissors and I'm going to cut into the material on the back, and I'm just going to trim that out like that, doing it flat so it's not quite as easy to do it as if I just had it in my hand, but it's not too difficult to do. And obviously because we've already fray checked, it won't fray on those edges, so it makes it a lot better. Just going to turn that around to make it easier to cut out, I'm just going to trim that out like that. As I say, it's a little bit fiddly because I'd normally do this in my hand, but for demonstration purposes I need it to be flat, so that when you take that away now and you put that over the top, it makes it much easier. You've not got the edge around it. Okay, so we've cut this out and we just need to now cut around here. We don't need a very wide area. I've put the fray check on, but I'm actually going to cut just outside of the fray check slightly, so I'm just going to hold that down there like that, and depends on exactly where you've done your fray check, of course, so it's in line with it there, just outside of it in some places. Okay, let me just turn that around so it makes it easier for me to cut. And again, turn it a little bit more. So we've just got this little edge here. I'm just going to go outside of the line there. You can see the difference with the fraying if you don't use the fray check as if you do. It makes quite a big difference. Right, so the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to do a running stitch all the way around the edge, about halfway between the white line and the edge here. Okay, so I'm going to take that off and I'm just going to do that stitching. So we've done a running stitch, and it's a running stitch all the way around. I've left two little ends, one at the beginning, one at the end. Now there is a little knot in that one, but you don't need to worry about that. That was just so that it didn't come through, and then I pulled it back almost immediately after, and then I've just done a really big running stitch all the way around. So then what you would do is you would put that in the centre. Now bearing in mind that when you do the running stitch, just be careful, because if you've got it laid in your hand like that, then you will be touching this side, and depending on the embroidery, you might not want to be touching it too much. So you might want to cover the embroidery on the other side before you're doing that. So what you need to do now is you need to start pulling these in, and it'll draw those edges into the centre like that. Okay, so once you've done that, you then need to tie this off. So we'll just do a knot just here. Okay, and that'll bring that in like that. And then we'll do another finish off that knot just here. So I'm just going to hold that down. I'm going to pull that and tighten it up as much as I possibly can before I start to bring this one down, because otherwise you'll get little bits like that. So draw it in, press on it, and then tighten up this part of the knot. Now you will potentially get little bits like that, and what you can do is you can just stitch across to ensure that that is taken back. So I'm just going to demonstrate that so you can see how that needs to be done. So we can at this stage as well just snip these little stray ends off like that. Okay, and then what you can do is you can just stitch into there. Okay, and it's just like lacing up really. So you're just coming through there and then you're pulling that across like that. Let's just get rid of that stray end. Okay, and then we're just going to pull that in there. I'm going to take in this part here. And we're just literally going round the circle and pulling it tight all the time. So we're just going to come in here, bring it through on that side, like that. If you pull it too tight, depending on the type of thread you're using, it could snap your thread, so you just need to be careful that you don't snap your thread. Okay, and this is also another reason why it's good to have fray checked your material, because if you haven't fray checked it, then it'll make it a lot harder to get it through there and make sure that it's fine and it's not going to come off. Okay, so let's just have that tail getting in the way again, so I'm just going to put one last stitch on this side. Just came out of the thread because it was quite short. So that stitch is holding that in place, and then just going to hold that down like that. Do a couple of little stay stitches there. Try not to poke the needle into my finger. Okay. Right, so there we go. That's our thread there. So now you need to just put that in your frame and then put the back of the frame on. So this is at the front of our frame and this is the back of our frame. So we need to turn that over and we need to put our design into the frame like that. So you just push it in on that side and then you just check to see whether it's right on this side. And obviously, depending on which design, you might have to just pull it, slacken it off and pull it over if it was too far over and you wanted it to be more central, then you'd have to readjust to make sure that it was more central. So once you've done that, you can then put your back on. And if you've got some little bits sticking out like these here, then you might just want to make sure that they're all tucked in. So the more strands you've got going across, obviously the more likely it is that you wouldn't see any of those strands. And then you can pop that on the back and then you just push these in and it's as simple as that. So once you've put all those in, like that, then that's your piece of work on the front. Okay, and it's as simple as that, putting a brooch frame together.